I'm afraid this entire 1,000 acres is now my private property.
You can't do that. That's impossible.
I didn't buy into a neighborhood. I inherited 1,000 acres of land. And buried inside that land quietly, illegally, was an entire HOA. 150 homes. Millions collected in fees. Rules enforced like royal decrees. All of it sitting on land they never owned. For 40 years they believed confidence was ownership, that repetition made it real. That an HOA president's signature carried the weight of law. It didn't. One old deed said otherwise. The developer was gone. The lease was expiring. Illegally. Every single house sat on my property. They didn't know my name. They didn't know what they'd been paying for. They had no idea the authority they feared had never existed at all. Because when fake power collides with real ownership, when control meets the law, it isn't a negotiation. Someone always loses everything. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. The letter from the estate attorney arrived on a Tuesday, completely unexpected and utterly life-changing. Estate of Harold Brennan - sole beneficiary notification. Our protagonist had barely known Great-Uncle Harold, a distant relative who'd lived alone on rural land upstate. The kind of family member you heard about at reunions but never actually met. Reclusive, eccentric. The man who'd bought 1,000 acres back in the 1960s for $50,000 and then essentially disappeared into the woods for 60 years. Apparently, he'd passed away at 92, and through a combination of his simple will and the reality that most other relatives had either predeceased him or moved out of state, our protagonist was now the sole heir to his entire estate. 1,000 acres of mostly wooded land in rural Pennsylvania, free and clear. Worth, according to the attorney's preliminary assessment, somewhere between $8 and $12 million depending on development potential. It felt surreal, unearned, like winning a lottery you didn't remember entering. The attorney's office provided boxes of property records, tax documents, and old correspondence dating back decades. Most of it was routine property tax receipts, timber surveys, conservation easement documents for the majority of the acreage. But one folder caught attention immediately: Meadowview Estates ground lease agreement. Our protagonist pulled out the yellowed contract and read with growing fascination. 1984, Great-Uncle Harold had agreed to lease 200 acres of his property to Riverside Development Corporation for a 50-year term. The lease allowed the developer to build a residential community, what became Meadowview Estates, a neighborhood of 150 homes that now housed families who'd been living there for decades. The annual lease payment, $12,000, paid like clockwork for 40 years but never once increased, despite inflation turning that amount from reasonable to laughably low. The lease included a renewal clause at the end of 50 years. The lease could be renewed at the landowner's sole discretion and under terms to be renegotiated. If not renewed, all structures would remain property of the homeowners, but the land itself would revert to full control of the landowner. Our protagonist checked the dates. The lease had been signed in January 1984. 50 years meant it expired in January of next year, 6 months away. According to the records, Great-Uncle Harold had never signed a renewal, never negotiated new terms, never even responded to the developer's automated renewal notices from the early 2000s, probably because by then, he'd stopped checking his mail regularly and the developer had eventually stopped asking. A quick property records search revealed something else interesting. Riverside Development Corporation had dissolved in 1998. The company that originally leased the land no longer existed, which meant no one had legal authority to negotiate a renewal, even if they wanted to. The homeowners of Meadowview Estates were living on land they didn't own, under a lease that was about to expire, with no entity that could extend it. Did they know? Our protagonist pulled up the Meadowview Estates HOA website and started reading community guidelines, violation policies, board member bios. Everything was written with the confident authority of people who believed they owned their small kingdom. The HOA president, Gregory Whitman, had a biography that described him as protecting property values and maintaining our community's standards for over 15 years. The fee schedule listed $800 per month in mandatory HOA dues, nearly $10,000 per year, per household, totaling over $1 million annually collected from residents. For what? The website showed a community pool, a small clubhouse, and standard landscaping. It's nothing that justified $1 million a year. Where was all that money going? Our protagonist spent the next week researching. Online reviews of Meadowview Estates painted a picture of an HOA run like a personal fiefdom, excessive fines for minor violations, foreclosures on families who fell behind on fees, elderly residents forced out after decades because they couldn't afford ever-increasing assessments. Gregory Whitman's name appeared repeatedly praised by some as maintaining standards, condemned by others as a tyrant who'd turned a neighborhood into a dictatorship. And through it all, not one mention that they were living on leased land. The HOA documents, the property listings, the community marketing materials, everything referred to Meadowview Estates as if the residents owned the ground beneath their houses. Either the developer had never told them the truth, or the information had been deliberately obscured over decades until everyone simply forgot or never knew to begin with. Our protagonist sat in the attorney's office, boxes of documents surrounding them, and made a decision. Before announcing ownership, before sending legal notices, before doing anything official, they needed to see this community for themselves. Needed to understand what kind of people they were dealing with. Needed to know if Gregory Whitman and his HOA board deserved mercy, or a reminder about what actual property ownership meant. The attorney raised an eyebrow. You want to visit incognito? As a prospective buyer? Exactly. If they're reasonable people trapped in a bad situation, we'll work something out. But if they're the tyrants these reviews suggest, ... double quotes, our protagonist smiled slightly. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them they've been playing king on land they never owned. The open house at 47 Maple Drive happened on a Sunday afternoon, and our protagonist arrived dressed like any other prospective buyer, casual but presentable, friendly but non-committal, asking the kinds of questions someone relocating for work might ask. The real estate agent was eager, overly so, suggested homes in Meadowview Estates didn't move as quickly as the manicured lawns and pristine sidewalks might imply. The HOA is very active, the agent said, walking through the empty living room. They maintain high standards. It's part of what makes this community so desirable. What are the fees? Our protagonist asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear how it would be presented. $800 a month. Covers all common area maintenance, the pool, clubhouse, landscaping standards, enforcement. The agent trailed off like she was reading from a script she didn't quite believe. That's steep. Almost $10,000 a year. Will you get what you pay for? The HOA president, Gregory Whitman, runs a tight ship. Property values stay stable because of the standards. Stable. That was one word for it. Our protagonist had seen the property value trends. Homes in Meadowview Estates appreciated slower than surrounding areas without HOAs. Turns out excessive fees and tyrannical enforcement didn't actually help values. They suppressed them. Outside, neighbors had started gathering on lawns, curious about who might be moving in. Our protagonist took the opportunity to wander, striking up conversations, asking casual questions about what it was like to live here. The elderly couple in 52 Maple spoke in hushed tones, like they were afraid of being overheard. We've been here 30 years, the husband said, voice tired. Raised our kids here, but honestly, we're thinking of leaving. Last month, a storm knocked down our oak tree, the one in the backyard, not even visible from the street. HOA sent us a bill for $5,000. Unapproved tree removal. We didn't remove it. Nature did. But Gregory says we should have gotten written permission before allowing storm damage, his wife added bitterly. We're on a fixed income. We don't have $5,000. He's threatening to put a lien on our house. A young mother 2 houses down shared her own nightmare. I was late on HOA fees by 2 weeks. My daughter was sick. Medical bills piled up. I asked for an extension. Gregory sent me a foreclosure notice. Not a warning, a notice. For being 14 days late on $800. He told me if I couldn't afford the fees, maybe I shouldn't live here. Families driven out by accumulated fines. Violations issued for flower colors not on the approved list. A retired teacher who'd painted her shutters the wrong shade of gray and faced daily citations until she either repainted or moved. Most people stayed because they'd invested everything into their homes and couldn't afford to leave. They were trapped, paying tribute to an HOA board that seemed to exist solely to make their lives harder. Then Gregory Whitman himself appeared. He was exactly what our protagonist expected, mid-50s. Pressed polo shirt with a Meadowview Estates logo, clipboard in hand like a weapon. That particular smile that said he enjoyed his authority far too much. He'd spotted the prospective buyer talking to residents and swooped in with practiced efficiency. Gregory Whitman, HOA president, he said, extending a hand with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Welcome to Meadowview Estates. I like to personally meet anyone considering our community. Can I give you the official tour? Our protagonist accepted, curious to hear how Gregory would present his kingdom. The tour was revealing in ways Gregory didn't intend. He walked the streets like a general inspecting troops, noting which lawns met standards, which mailboxes needed repainting, which homes were in compliance. He pointed out the community pool average, nothing special, the clubhouse small, dated, and the premium landscaping that justified the fee, standard mowing and trimming that any neighborhood got for a fraction of the cost. We're completely self-governed, Gregory said with pride. No outside interference. No developers. No landlords. We own this land. Community does. Has since it was developed back in the 80s. That's what gives us authority to maintain standards. Full ownership. Full control. Our protagonist stopped walking. You own it? The HOA owns the land? The community does, Gregory corrected, though the distinction seemed meaningless to him. When Riverside Development built here, ownership transferred to the homeowners. We're not beholden to anyone. That's what makes our standards enforceable. We have absolute authority over our property. He had no idea. None of them did. They'd been living on lease ground for 40 years, paying fees to an HOA that claimed ownership it never possessed, following rules enforced by a board that had authority over nothing but the fear they'd cultivated in their own neighbors. Our protagonist smiled politely. That's fascinating. Must give you a lot of power. It gives us responsibility, Gregory replied, missing the subtle edge in the question. Not everyone appreciates what it takes to maintain a community like this. We've had to foreclose on 3 families in the past 2 years. Unfortunate, but necessary. Standards don't maintain themselves. That evening, our protagonist attended the monthly HOA board meeting open to the public. According to the bylaws, though few residents bothered anymore, they'd learned that objecting just put a target on your back. The meeting room in the small clubhouse held maybe 20 people, most looking resigned or afraid. Gregory ran the meeting with iron control. Denied a fee reduction request from a family facing medical hardship. Proved a foreclosure proceeding against residents $800 behind 2 months of fees, an amount that would ruin their credit and cost them their home. Rejected a proposal to audit the HOA finances. Dismissed questions about where the $1 million in annual fees actually went. Our protagonist sat in the back, watching, documenting, and feeling the decision crystallize with absolute clarity. The lease would not be renewed, not with these people in charge. Not while Gregory Whitman treated scared families like subjects in his personal kingdom, built on land he'd never owned and never would. Sometimes mercy is the right answer, and sometimes people need to learn that authority without ownership is just bullying with paperwork. The certified letters went out on a Monday morning. 153 of them, 1 to each homeowner, and 3 to the HOA board members. Our protagonist's real estate attorney had drafted them with surgical precision, factual, unemotional, legally airtight. The kind of letter that changes lives in a single page. Ground lease expiration. Meadowview Estates, the letter explained, in clear language, that the land beneath Meadowview Estates had been leased from the Brennan family estate since 1984, under a 50-year ground lease. That lease would expire in 90 days and would not be renewed. Homeowners retained ownership of their structures, but would need to either purchase their individual lots at fair market value or make arrangements to relocate. Contact information for the estate's legal representation was provided for those wishing to discuss purchase options. The letters arrived on Tuesday. By Tuesday afternoon, the HOA office phone was ringing off the hook. By Tuesday evening, social media erupted with panic, confusion, and anger. By Wednesday morning, Gregory Whitman had called an emergency HOA meeting for that very evening, mandatory attendance strongly encouraged.
Ow!
Protagonist arrived at 6:30, 15 minutes before the meeting's start time, and found the small clubhouse already packed beyond capacity. Residents spilled into the parking lot, faces ranging from terrified to furious. The elderly couple from Maple Drive stood near the back, holding hands, looking shell-shocked. The single mom sat in a folding chair, baby on her hip, reading and rereading the letter like she hoped the words would change. Others argued in clusters, voices rising, trying to make sense of information that seemed impossible. Gregory stood at the front like a general before battle, flanked by the 2 other board members who looked considerably less confident than their president. When he spotted our protagonist entering someone he didn't recognize, someone who clearly wasn't a resident, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "This meeting is for homeowners only," Gregory announced, voice cutting through the noise. "I'm here as a representative of the landowner," our protagonist replied calmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Brennan estate? I believe you have questions." The room went silent, then erupted. "Is this real?" Someone shouted. "We own our homes. You can't take them. This has to be a scam." Gregory's face had gone red, that particular shade that comes right before either a heart attack or an explosion of rage. He chose rage. "This is fraud. We own this land. The developer sold it to us when we bought our homes. I have deeds. We all have deeds." Our protagonist nodded to the attorney who'd accompanied them. She stepped forward with a banker's box and began distributing copies of documents. The original 1984 ground lease, signed by Harold Brennan and Riverside Development Corporation. County property records showing continuous Brennan family ownership since 1962. Title reports confirming no transfer of land ownership to Riverside. Development, only a leasehold interest. Deed records showing homeowners owned structures, not land. "Your deeds," the attorney explained in the patient tone of someone who'd done this before, "convey ownership of the improvements, the houses themselves, not the underlying land. That's standard in ground lease situations. The developer leased the land, built homes, and sold the homes. But they never owned the land to sell." "That's impossible," Gregory sputtered, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "We've been here for 40 years. We've paid property taxes." "You've paid taxes on the improvements," the attorney corrected. "The landowner has paid taxes on the land itself. It's all in the public record. Available at the county assessor's office for anyone who'd bothered to check." The elderly gentleman from Maple Drive raised a shaking hand. "But if this is true, if we've been on leased land this whole time, where did our HOA fees go? We've been paying $800 a month for decades. If $12,000 a year went to the lease, where's the rest?" The room went very, very quiet. Every eye turned to Gregory. "That's HOA operating expenses," Gregory said, but something in his voice had changed. A defensive edge. "Landscaping," Clubhouse operations. Management fees, someone interrupted. Your management company, the one you own. That's separate from my HOA duties? How much? The single mom demanded. Standing up, baby still on her hip. How much in management fees? Gregory's jaw clenched. It's confidential financial. $150,000 per year, our protagonist said clearly, give or take. I had a forensic accountant review the publicly available HOA tax filings. Gregory's management company receives approximately $150,000 annually from HOA funds for community management services. That's in addition to the $12,000 for the land lease and roughly $50,000 for actual operational costs, which means about $800,000 per year. Roughly 80% of collected fees goes directly to Gregory's personal accounts through his management company shell. The silence that followed was deafening. Then someone started doing math out loud. 15 years you've been president? It's 15 years times 150,000. That's over $2 million. You've taken $2 million from us, while threatening to foreclose on families over $800? Gregory's face had gone from red to white. This is slander. My management company provides essential services. The board approved every contract. The board you control? Someone shouted. The board that rubber stamps everything you propose. The room descended into chaos. Board members trying to distance themselves from Gregory. The elderly couple, openly weeping. Whether from relief that they weren't crazy for feeling exploited or despair at realizing how much they'd lost, it was hard to tell. Our protagonist let it play out for a few minutes. Let the reality sink in that they'd been scammed twice, once by a developer who'd sold them homes on land they'd never owned, and again by an HOA president who'd spent 15 years funneling their fees into his own pocket while threatening their homes over late payments. Finally, they raised their voice. Everyone, please, I understand this is overwhelming, but screaming at each other won't solve anything. Let's focus on what happens next. The room quieted, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. The lease expires in 90 days, our protagonist continued. At that point, the land reverts to full control of the Brennan estate, which I now represent as sole heir. You have options? Option 1. Purchase your individual lots. Fair market value is approximately $40,000 per quarter-acre lot. Option 2. Negotiate a new lease arrangement. I'm offering year-to-year leases at $500 per month, $6,000 per year, significantly less than you're currently paying in HOA fees just to live on land you don't own. $40,000? Someone gasped. How are we supposed to afford that? I'm offering owner financing, our protagonist replied. 10% down, $4,000, with the remainder financed at 3% interest over 15 years. Monthly payment of approximately $275. Combined with eliminating your $800 monthly HOA fee, most of you would actually pay less per month while building equity in land you'd actually own. The math started clicking for people. Faces that had been panicked began showing calculation, hope, possibility. And if we can't afford even that, the elderly couple asked quietly, then you lease year-to-year at $500 a month. No HOA fees, no board, no violations for tree removal or shutter colors. It's just a straightforward lease with a landowner who isn't trying to squeeze every dollar out of you. This is extortion, Gregory exploded. You're threatening to evict 150 families unless they pay you. This is what you've been doing for 15 years? Duh. Our protagonist interrupted, voice sharp now, threatening foreclosure over late fees. Forcing families out because they couldn't afford your constantly increasing assessments. Fining elderly couples $5,000 for storm damage? The difference is, I'm offering reasonable terms for people to actually own their land. You've been collecting fees for land you never owned, while providing nothing but fear and violations. We'll sue, Gregory shouted. Adverse possession. We've been here for 40 years, paying property taxes, maintaining the land. The attorney actually laughed. Mr. Whitman, you can't adversely possess land you're paying rent on. Adverse possession requires that the possession be hostile without permission. You've been paying $12,000 a year in lease payments. That's not hostile possession. That's acknowledgement that someone else owns the land. Your adverse possession claim is dead on arrival. Then we'll sue for fraudulent misrepresentation. The developer told us we owned. The developer's been defunct since 1998. The attorney cut in. And even if you could sue them, that doesn't change the underlying property ownership. The land belongs to the Brennan estate. It's been recorded that way for 60 years. Your dispute is with a defunct company that lied to you, not with the current landowner who's offering you a fair deal. Gregory looked around the room, searching for support, for allies, for anyone who'd back him up. He found none. The residents who'd been afraid of him for years were now looking at him with expressions ranging from disgust to fury. I want a financial audit, someone called out. Full audit of every dollar the HOA has collected and spent for the past 15 years. Seconded, multiple voices replied. We need to vote, another resident said. Vote to remove Gregory. Vote to dissolve this corrupt board. Vote to negotiate directly with the landowner without Gregory's management company taking a cut. "You can't dissolve the HOA without my approval," Gregory said desperately. "I'm the president. The bylaws require." "The bylaws," our protagonist said quietly, "were written for an HOA managing land they thought they owned. But you don't own it. You never did. You've been operating under a false premise for 40 years. The moment this lease expires, the HOA has zero authority over this land. You can keep your little club if you want, but it won't have any power to enforce rules, collect fees, or threaten anyone's home. Because you can't enforce covenants on land you don't own." So realization spread through the room like wildfire. Their HO, a force of so much stress, so many fees, so much fear, had never actually had the authority it claimed. It had been a phantom, a shared delusion, backed only by the collective belief that Gregory and his board had power they'd never legally possessed. "If we dissolve the HOA," the single mom asked slowly, "and negotiate individually with you, can we actually afford to stay?" "Yes," our protagonist replied. "That's the whole point. I don't want to displace 150 families. I want to give you the chance to actually own your home structures and land at prices you can afford. What I don't want is to perpetuate a system where you're paying $800 a month to an HOA that's been scamming you while you live on land you'll never own." "What about the pool?" someone asked. "The clubhouse? If there's no HOA, who maintains them?" "That's up to you to figure out," our protagonist said. "Form a voluntary neighborhood association. Pool money for maintenance. Or don't. It's not my concern. My concern is the land. You want to keep playing HOA games with each other, that's your business. But you'll be doing it as actual landowners, not as tenants pretending you have authority you don't possess." Gregory made one last desperate play. "If you dissolve the HOA, I'll make sure none of you can buy. I'll challenge every sale. I'll tie this up in court for years. You'll lose your homes before you ever get clear title. You have zero authority here," our protagonist said, and their voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You never did. You just convinced a bunch of scared people that you had power over land you never owned. That ends today. Lease expires in 90 days. After that, you're just another resident with a house on land that belongs to someone else. You have no more say in what happens here than anyone else in this room. Less, actually. Because I suspect when the criminal investigation into your embezzlement is finished, you won't be living here at all." Gregory's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly gray. The word criminal had penetrated where nothing else had. The elderly gentleman stood up slowly. "I move that we vote immediately to dissolve the current HOA board and appoint an interim committee to negotiate with the landowner and conduct a full financial audit." "Seconded," came from at least a dozen voices. The vote was unanimous. Everyone except Gregory, who didn't bother voting because he'd already turned and walked out, shoulders hunched, the king of a kingdom that had just vanished beneath his feet. Once the court dust settled, I did something Gregory never expected. I didn't evict anyone. I didn't sell the land to a developer. I sat down with spreadsheets, maps, and a simple question. How do I fix what he broke without breaking the people who live here? So I made an offer. Every family living on my land got the same choice. No pressure, no tricks. They could buy their lot for $40,000, well below market value, or lease it for $300 a month, year to year. No HOA, no hidden fees, no compliance fines. Just land, clearly owned, clearly documented. The response stunned even me. 140 families chose to buy. Many used money they'd been bleeding out for years in HOA fees, penalties, and special assessments. I offered owner financing. No credit checks, no banks. Just fair contracts and payment plans that didn't punish people for existing. 10 families chose to lease. They wanted flexibility. I respected that. One elderly couple sat across from me shaking. Gregory had fined them $5,000 for a tree that had been there longer than the HOA. They thought they'd lose their home. I sold them their lot for $30,000 and forgave the fine entirely. A single mom came next. She was behind on payments, terrified of foreclosure, holding back tears while explaining she just needed time. We set up a lease tone plan at $250 a month until she could save for a down payment. No penalties. No deadlines meant to trap her. That was the moment the community changed. What had been ruled by fear slowly became something else: cooperation, relief, dignity. Then Gregory's world collapsed. The financial audit came back worse than anyone imagined. Over $800,000 embezzled across 15 years. His so-called management company wasn't a company at all, just a shell that funneled HOA fees straight into his personal accounts. Vacations, cars, renovations, all paid for by people he terrified into silence. Criminal charges followed fast: embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. Civil suits stacked up as homeowners finally had the proof they needed. Portions of the stolen money were recovered. His assets were seized. His house went into foreclosure. Gregory was convicted. 4 years in prison, restitution ordered, and the lot he'd lived on. I sold it at a discount to a young family with 2 kids and a beat-up pickup. They waved at me the day they moved in. Gregory's old driveway filled with chalk drawings instead of lawyers. The HOA didn't survive. It was officially dissolved. In its place, Residents formed a voluntary neighborhood association. No mandatory fees, no authority over private property. Common areas were maintained through small, optional contributions. Funny thing is people actually pitched in when they weren't being threatened. Violation notices disappeared. Petty fines vanished. And property values didn't fall. They rose. Buyers loved the words, "No HOA." As for me, I placed 800 acres under a conservation easement. Forest stayed forest, wildlife stayed undisturbed. The land my great-uncle loved remained untouched. 6 months later, I hosted a community barbecue. No speeches, no podium, just an open invitation. Kids ran through the grass. Smoke drifted from the grills. Laughter echoed where fear used to live. The elderly couple found me near the fence. "You could have evicted us all," the husband said quietly. Instead, his wife added, squeezing his hand, "You gave us a chance to actually own our home." The single mom hugged me without asking. "My daughter can grow up here now," she said. "Without worrying we'll lose everything over a fee we can't afford." Even one of Gregory's loudest supporters came over. "I thought the HOA protected us," he admitted. Turns out it was just one man stealing from 150 families in. We were too scared to question him. As the sun dipped, someone finally asked the question everyone had been circling. "Why'd you do it? You could have sold this land for millions." I looked out over the crowd. Over the lights flicking on in houses that no longer felt temporary. "My great-uncle bought this land because he loved it," I said. "He leased part of it because he believed in community." Somewhere along the way, someone forgot that community isn't about control, it's about people helping each other. Gregory turned it into a kingdom. I just reminded everyone who actually owned the land. Later, I walked the property line alone. 800 acres of quiet forest behind me. 150 homes glowing through the trees ahead. Families inside. Doors unlocked. Fear gone. An HOA had claimed authority over land it never owned. Tyrant collected fees for decades while giving nothing back but anxiety. But here's the truth about power. It only exists when people believe you have it. The moment they realize you've been lying, it disappears like smoke. And sometimes, all it takes is one person with an old DH and a conscience to remind a whole community what freedom actually looks like.